Assalamu alaikum guys, welcome to chapter 8, lesson 8. This is the last lesson of the year. Now the purpose of this lesson is for you to learn how to complete a square. It's another way or method of trying to solve quadratics. Now for your assignment today is just basically to take the class notes. You will upload the class notes and inshallah they should look exactly like what I'm presenting. So at any time when you're watching the video, slow it down or stop it so you can write every single thing down. What I want you to take from this is for you to walk out with good notes on this lesson because it's not an easy lesson and there will be no other assignments. So inshallah, as you watch the video, take your notes, upload them, and then you're done for the year, inshallah, other than the attendance question. So now completing the square, let's say for example that you have x squared plus bx. So the whole purpose is to end up with a perfect square trinomial that will look like x squared plus bx plus b over 2 squared. So b over 2 squared is what's going to help us complete the square. Now what the purpose is that you're going to end up with a square of a binomial and you're going to end up with what looks like x plus b over 2 and then in parentheses squared. Eventually we're going to put obviously real numbers so you can actually see what happens with the math. So your instructions are find the value of c. So we're trying to find, remember this doesn't have a c value because it's just x squared plus bx. We're supposed to have a plus c. We don't have a plus c, so that's the whole purpose. We're trying to find the value of c to make it a perfect square trinomial. And then finally our final answer should be written as square of a binomial. So let's get to it and actually apply actual numbers to this. So for my first example, I have x squared plus 7x plus c, okay? So I'm trying to find my c value. And remember that we said in order to get the c value, we're going to take b over 2 and we're going to square it. You're going to take your value of b out of the expression itself. Remember that this is your a, this is your b, and we have a non-existent c right now, okay? So my value of b is 7. So my c is going to be 7 over 2 squared, okay? Now what's 7 over 2 squared? It's 49 over 4. C is equal to 49 over 4. Okay? So now you're not going to simplify that to anything other than just leave it as is. Now, in order to write it as, a perfect square trinomial, keep your x squared, keep the middle term of 7x, and then add your c value, which now became 49 over 4. So this was the first step. Write it as a perfect square trinomial. The second step, if you remember in previous lessons when we were trying to factor out perfect square trinomials, remember that we would take our x squared. Is it a perfect square? Yes, it is. It's x. And then what about our last term, 49 over 4? Is it a perfect square? Yes, it is, which is 7/2. And then remember, this is a positive. So therefore, our final answer should be x plus 7 over 2 squared. So this is our second answer. Now, the only reason I'm showing you this is to remember how we used to do it in the past. It's not absolutely necessary. You should understand that the square root is up here anyways before you squared it. Okay? So let's try another example. Let's say, for example, we have now x squared plus 8x plus c. Okay? So remember the c is equal to b over 2 squared. What's our value of b? 8, right? So c is equal to 8 over 2 squared. So c is equal to 4 squared. C is equal to 16. Okay? So you can go ahead and simplify as much as possible down as you go along, right? So in order to write our perfect square trinomial, remember x squared plus 8x plus my c value. So here is my perfect square trinomial. Now again, what's the square root of x squared? It's x. What's the square root of 16? It's up here before we squared it, which is 4, right? So how do we write it? We have to keep track. Is this a positive or negative? It's a positive, and we're talking about the middle term. So therefore, on this case, our final answer, x plus 4 squared, okay? So there's our perfect square trinomial, and then this is our perfect square of a binomial, okay? Now, let's try another example again. Let's say that we have x squared minus 12x plus c, okay? So this one is negative. You can keep track of the negative. You don't necessarily have to technically, because when you square a negative, it becomes a positive, but up to you. So let's go ahead and figure out what our value of c is. C is equal to, you can take the negative 12 over 2 squared, right? So c is equal to negative 6 squared. C is equal to, what do you call it? 36, right? So usually, I don't keep track of the negative. You don't have to keep track of the negative, and I'll show you that even as we're working, okay, you can or cannot or don't necessarily need to keep track of it. Like I said, you still end up with the same answer because positive 12 divided by 2 is still 6, and 6 squared is still 36. So whether it's positive or negative, it doesn't matter. The whole point is, though, at the end of the answer, you do need to keep track of the negative. So right here, in order to complete the square, our answer would be x squared minus 12x. So x squared minus 12x, and then plus the 36. So here is our perfect square trinomial, and now for our binomial. Remember that this is negative. This is where we do have to keep track of it. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 36 is 6. And because the middle term is negative, this is where you put that negative. So final answer here is x minus 6 squared, okay? Now, what's the purpose of all this, guys? So the purpose of this is that you are able to actually also find the answers when you don't have a value of c. So if I were to ask you, solve this, you know, find the zeros, find the roots, find the solutions, find the x-intercepts, right? Find the real roots, all of them mean the same thing. This problem, remember that anytime that we're finding the zeros, it has to equal to 0. So x minus 6 is equal to 0. Add 6 to both sides, x is equal to positive 6. So your x-intercept is just 6. So this type of problem has one solution, okay? But even completing the square works for problems that have more than one solution as well. So let's try. The next part of the lesson is going to be complete the square and solve. In other words, find your zeros of the function. And it works for problems that can be factored out, and it works obviously for problems that you cannot meet the two conditions or what have you. So here we go. So the deal is complete the square and solve. All right, so solve by completing the square. So let's say, for example, I give you x squared plus 6x is equal to 7. Okay? Now remember, we need to find a value of c. We're not going to take that 7 and subtract it. We're going to leave it where it's at. So in order for us to find our c value, okay, so our value of c, remember, is b over 2 squared. C is equal to 6 over 2 squared. C is equal to 3 squared. And then c is equal to 9. Okay, so we found the value of c to be 9. So here we go. On this side, x squared plus 6x plus 9. Or you can also put it as 3 squared, up to you. So I'll just say 9 is equal to. Since we're adding 9, the whole point of this too is that you have an equation. So what you do to one side, since I added 9 to the left, I'm going to keep my 7 and I'm going to add 9 to the right. Because remember, you have to have a balance. You can't just add 9 to one side and assume that it's okay. You added 9 here, you better add 9 to the other side, okay? So now here, what is the perfect square, right? We've got the perfect square trinomial, so now what is the square of the binomial, or the square of a binomial, right? The radical of x squared is x. This is a positive, so it's plus. What's the radical of 9? It's 3. And remember that this is squared. Now over here on this side, I have 7 plus 9. 7 plus 9 is 16, okay? Now in a previous lesson, when we were, I believe it was 8.5, when I was telling you, okay, we need to solve for this, we need to get rid of that square right there. How is it that we get rid of the square? Remember, you don't need to show this, but I'm showing it in red just so you can see this. If I take the square root of this, the square root undoes the square, okay? So if I'm doing the square root here, guess what? I need to do the square root over there too. And remember, don't forget on this case that you always have the plus and minus square root of square root. So here we go. X plus 3 is equal to the positive negative radical of 16. So x plus 3 is equal to plus minus 4. Now, the only thing left for this problem right here is I need to subtract 3 from both sides, because the whole point is I'm trying to find what the value of x is. So I'm going to subtract 3 from here, and I'm going to subtract 3 from here. On my left-hand side, I have x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 4. So now I write my two conditions. X is equal to negative 3 plus 4, and then also x is equal to negative 3 minus 4. So what are my x-intercepts? X is equal to 1, and x is equal to negative 7. So my two solutions, if you were to graph this equation, obviously this could have been done through factoring, guys. But anyways, you still need to learn how to complete a square, whether you can do it through factoring or if it's not possible at all. So the x-intercepts here, whenever it would be graphed, it will pass through 1 and it'll pass through negative 7. So let's try one where there's no way you can factor it, okay? Still the same instructions. And usually, whenever you have to find the radical of a number, or rather the solutions, the x-intercepts, it's usually to the nearest hundredth. It's a given. So unless it's specific instructions say to the nearest tenth, usually it tells you to the nearest hundredth, okay? And if it doesn't tell you, assume it's to the nearest hundredth. So here we go. Let's say, for example, we have 3x squared. The middle term is plus 12x. And then the last term is equal to, or rather minus 18 is equal to 0. Okay? So remember, when we were previously working, we were talking about x squared plus bx, right? Well, this has a c. The only time you can complete a square is if it doesn't have a c. So how am I going to force this to become to where it doesn't have a c? I need to get rid of that 18, okay? So here we go. First thing, I'm going to add 18 to both sides. So now I have 3x squared plus 12x is equal to 18, okay? Now I need to find my c value. I need to force a c in here because I want to make it a perfect square. So my b value, again, is 12. And then go ahead and actually, before we even do anything, okay, at this point, okay, could have been done here. Sorry about my alarm going off, guys. It could have been done back here, but I usually do it in this step. Go ahead and factor out a GCF because that'll make your numbers more manageable. So remember, all of these are divisible by 3, right? And in this case, guys, you don't have to keep track of that 3 because we're not actually factoring. What we're doing is we're finding solutions. we're simplifying. So now I'm at x squared plus 4x is equal to 6. So now my numbers are more manageable, and let's go ahead and find the c value that goes right here. So my c value, remember that b is 4, so c is equal to 4 squared, 4 over 2 squared, c is equal to 2 squared, and then c is equal to 4. So remember, if I am adding 4 to one side, I'm adding 4 to the other side. So now my problem looks like x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 6 plus 4. All right, so what is the square root of x squared? X, what's the square root of 4? 2. And remember, it's a positive, so x plus 2 is going to be squared, and then over here I have 10. Okay, so now the next step is go ahead and get rid of the square by finding the square root of both sides. Okay, so x plus 2 is equal to the positive negative radical of 10. Okay, and the positive negative radical of 10, go ahead and plug it into your calculator. So if we're dealing with, and I'll put it here on the side, the approximate radical of 10 in this case is 3.16. So this is the number that we're dealing with. So at this point, we can go ahead and say that x plus 2 is equal to positive negative 3.16, and then the next step is get rid of the 2. Okay, so subtract 2 from both sides, and now my problem is that x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 3.16. Okay, so now I can write my two statements. X is equal to negative 2 plus 3.16, or x is equal to negative 2 minus 3.16. And then what are the solutions? And in this case, you can notice there's no way you're going to be able to factor a problem that ends up as a decimal. So one of my x-intercepts is going to be approximately 1.16. So x is approximately 1.16, and the other solution is x is approximately negative 5.16. So the two solutions here are approximately 1.16, and the other one is approximately negative 5.16. So I know that it's a lot, guys, but I honestly just want you to have these notes so you can refer back to them when you're working in Algebra 2. Yes, it's going to take different twists, they're going to add more to it, but at least you are exposed now to the basics. So make sure you took good notes, upload them, and that's your assignment for today. See you in class if you have any questions on any assignments that are due today. Assalamu alaikum.